Welcome. You're watching Big Question. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Short seller Nathan Anderson, in a note on the Hindenburg website, has said that he is shutting shop. He is disbanding all operations of the so-called research firm. If you've not heard, Hindenburg is a self-proclaimed short seller who, by its own admission and through its reports, targets companies in advance, takes short positions and profits from the negative consequences of its reports on those companies and on the shareholders of those companies. Their job is to cause huge losses. They did exactly that in 2023 to the tune of 8 lakh crore rupees. Adani was targeted by Hindenburg in a report that caused panic in the stock markets, triggered a sell-off not only in group shares but across the board as well. The Supreme Court that went on to investigate these claims, market regulator SEBI went on to investigate claims, and a 3-member independent committee set up by the Supreme Court also probed the claims. Every single one of these institutions has since then dismissed any hint of wrongdoing by the Adani Group. Yet Nate Anderson persisted. He attempted a second report in 2024 that was pretty much a blip on the radar in terms of stock market impact. He attacked the SEBI chief personally in that too fell flat. Now he is walking away. Today he claims, and by the way, he is now richer by $4 million, which was made shorting the Adani Group stocks, with absolutely no accountability or repercussion or explanation for the losses incurred by investors. In fact, he's playing the victim card in his note. His note is very interesting if you read it. He talks about how he went to a state school, doesn't wear good clothes, can't play golf. It's a very unclear way to show himself as a victim. What about the reasons? Why is Nate Anderson shutting shop? He gives no clear reason for this decision in his note. He says there's no personal issue, no threat, no real reason for shutting down operations, no health reasons either. So then the question is it a mere coincidence that Hindenburg is disbanding just 4 days before the president-elect Donald Trump takes office in the United States? Is Nate Anderson now running for cover because the regime is changing in the US and he feels he could face legal action for his wrongdoings? And most importantly, should he face no consequences for the havoc that he and his company wreaked? Is it good enough to say that I am now shutting shop? I don't want to be known only for Hindenburg, I'm moving on. What about people who face the consequences of his action? To speak on this, I'm joined now by Mahesh Jethmalani, Senior Advocate and former Member of Parliament. Mr. Jethmalani, thank you so much for speaking with us. When you heard the news this morning that Hindenburg is now shutting shop, and you, I'm sure, read Nate Anderson's letter, what were the first thoughts that came to mind?
My first thoughts that came to mind were that this is karmic justice. I said that, this is a short seller who profiteered with Mr. George Soros and tried to shake the Indian markets, and of course, bear hammered the Adani shares. So I said that, if you believe in astrology, this is the time when post-Makar Sankranti, things turn better for victims of enemies. And, a lot of India's enemies are going to fall by the wayside. So in a sense, this aligns with the coming of Trump. And my own view is that Nate Anderson, has really got the fear of his life as to what might be forthcoming. I think it will be forthcoming for a lot of people who've tried to destabilize the Indian economy.
So, okay, he's got the fear of his life, but look at some of the things he's saying, Mr. Jethmalani. He goes on to talk about, I don't play golf, I don't wear good clothes, I didn't come from a finance. What exactly is he trying to say? Is this playing the victim card? Is this trying to escape legal scrutiny or consequence for his actions? Is he trying to paint some kind of picture?
Yes, I think he's trying to, it's an exercise in self-pity, right? For somebody who's actually indulged in very shady games. Right? And he first allowed himself to be called the short seller itself. He didn't deny that. when SEBI wrote to him, he said, look, I'm not the short seller. I'm a research analyst who provided material to another company. And there's a Chinese link. He can't escape that. And of course, to some extent, his statement, his reply to SEBI helped, because then we found out who the other players were. It's true that actually he was only a research analyst. But for some time, he didn't deny the tag which other people were giving him who were involved of being the actual short seller. But then you came to, the Kotak group acting as brokers for a company, for a trust fund which was owned by the Kingdoms, right? One of whom is Anla Cheng, who happens to be a Chinese spy being investigated for Chinese espionage on behalf of the Chinese state. So there's a lot of quirks in all this, but I think, in short, in substance, Nate Anderson and Hindenburg have said goodbye to their destabilizing ways. They've been fly-by-night operators used basically by enemies of India and people who are close to the democratic deep state, which in turn is funded by George Soros.
Now, so the question is then the reasons, Mr. Jethmalani, the reasons that he gave. One flimsier than the other. I mean, you read the whole letter and then you're still wondering what he's trying to say.
Yes.
So what about the timing? First of all, do you buy any of those reasons? I suppose not. But what do you make of the timing before 20th of January when Donald Trump swears in as takes oath as president once again?
Well, the timing is absolutely ominous. I mean, it's complete. It gives the game away, because obviously he fears that he will be called in for investigation. He knows that he's done wrong. Right? He knows that this was an attempt to destabilize an Indian economy. The Indian economy, which was an ally of the United States. I mean, we were treated very shabbily by a quad ally, i.e. the US. But you can't blame the entire United States government, but certainly the democratic deep state, the elements that control the Democratic Party in the US. And there is no doubt that George Soros drives the agenda of that democratic deep state. I mean, there's enough evidence that he's the main financier of the party. And his son Alex continues. I mean, his son Alex now is going to wed Huma Abedin, who's Hillary Clinton's private secretary at once upon a time when she was Secretary of State.
So what now, Mr. Jethmalani? Is it as simple as, so two-part question. One, Hindenburg shutting shop, does it mean Nate Anderson and the genesis of the attacks end? Because if he was just a front, then obviously the perpetrators are still out there. And second, should there be no consequence for his actions? Because this is like perhaps a burglar saying that now I have quit my ways, I'm not a burglar anymore. What about all of the robberies? What about the attacks?
Well, Tamar, first of all, there is an investigation going on by SEBI. So as far as the Indian authorities are concerned, SEBI will continue and do their best to call him to account. Of course, there's something difficult about the reach to an extraterritorial individual or entity like Hindenburg and Nate Anderson. But SEBI must do its best, because we must have a deterrent for the future where, foreign predators, financial predators are stalking our big companies and trying to destabilize those companies who provide wealth and jobs and infrastructure, and who are being undermined. And ultimately, of course, it has a ripple effect on the whole economy and retail investors. So, certainly SEBI should do something. I have no doubt that the American authorities responsible for, the Securities Commission and so on and so forth will also investigate this. And I won't be surprised if people who are alarmed by George Soros within the Republican administration will also be taking action. That how could you treat an ally in Quad, and somebody whom you say is a vital ally for your Indo-Pacific aims, right, in this manner?
So just a couple of questions now, Mr. Jethmalani. What happens to the Supreme Court case? What is the kind of view as the Supreme Court and SEBI could take of this announcement today? And overall, what about the people who have either initiated political attacks or legal action based on the report itself?
Well, those people can certainly be taken to task, right? The Indian government should. I mean, this is a case for investigation by the CBI for all the people who profited, right? I mean, already some people in Parliament who raised questions about it, right, for alleged consideration have already been named. But I think this needs to go steps a lot further about all these people, all those people in India, because I consider them to be agents of enemies, persons inimical to Indians' economic interests. So all those persons should be investigated by the CBI. There's no question on that, because I'm sure a lot of people have profited in this. I think Kotak could give us a lot of information in this matter. He's a broking house, right? Somebody, I don't know, somebody has to ask him how he was approached by them. Yeah, how he was approached to do this.
So is there now a situation, and is it valid to expect, say, a SEBI, a Supreme Court, the legal establishment to go after Nate Anderson and ask him what the genesis of all of this is? And, we're talking about just the Indian context. Nate Anderson has been doing this for a while. Could other regulators also step in, and would there be a valid case for that?
Well, you mean other regulators outside India?
Yes.
Yes. On the job.
Yes, SEC, for example.
The Securities Commission, SEC in the United States could certainly look. It's extremely ominous that not just Nate Anderson, right? But the moment Trump came in, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, who presented this indictment, also resigned. Right? I forget his name now, but he had also resigned. So obviously, that resignation is a sign that they knew that what they had done was wrong. Both Hindenburg and the Deputy Attorney General had been people who've been used by the system. The latter, even after Biden had lost.
Just last question to you, Mr. Jethmalani, because I know you're very, very busy today. Does this put, in a sense, an end to all of the allegations or credibility of the allegations or those who use the allegations to mount attacks? The fact that he's shut down, does it puncture any kind of credibility, if Hindenburg had any, in some people's eyes?
Well, I think let's not take too much of an inductive leap from this, right? The fact that Hindenburg has gone is certainly a very significant factor, right? It shows that it reveals two things clearly. One, that he is fearful of the Trump administration, and you are only fearful of the new administration if you think that you did something wrong and was protected by the old administration. A. B, I also think that it shows that he was a fly-by-night operator, and he was fronting for somebody else. And now we know that actually he was being manipulated and made a front until he himself was compelled in his reply to SEBI to expose who his principals were. Right? So he was a fly-by-night operator. There are only two cases for which he's prominent for short selling. One is involved in short selling. I don't know if he actually made a big short sale or he was the mastermind. One is the Adani case, and the other is Nikola Enterprise, right? So this man doesn't, Hindenburg was being projected at the time by some huge, financial organization. In effect, Nate Anderson, as he points out himself in his disbanding letter, right, is a pretty pathetic, ordinary creature. He didn't have the wherewithal to go in for such major hammering issues. Right? He was a front, he was a tool, and he did make some money, but somebody else exploited him and made much more money and attempted to cause havoc in India through the economy and the retail investors and the groups they targeted like Adani.
That, I think, keeps the question open. Yes, Hindenburg has shut shop, but what about the people who are behind him? And is there any real valid reason for him to shut shop? Does this also shut any kind of boost that these allegations were getting? Thank you so much for your time. Mahesh Jethmalani, Senior Advocate and former Member of Parliament, on Hindenburg shutting shop. I'm joined now by Ajay Bagga, market veteran. Jay Anant Dehadrai, Supreme Court lawyer, also joins me in this leg of the conversation. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today. Jay, I'm going to begin with your take and your understanding of what really has happened. The letter comes out of the blue, no real explanation here. Is this an attempt to face scrutiny of their actions by Hindenburg?
Hi, Tamanna, good afternoon. You're absolutely right, but I have 5 very precise, distinct points I'd like to make from what I have understood after reading Nate Anderson's letter today. This is no coincidence at all. You rightly pointed out that in 4 days' time, there is a new president, and with him, his entire new administration that is going to be sworn in to the United States. There has already been a letter that has been written by a very respected congressman, Lance Gooden, who's written to the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, asking for a full-fledged inquiry into the reasons and justifications that led to the DOJ's decision to begin this inquiry and investigation against the Adanis. That is very, very important. The chronology and the timeline here is very critical. Second, I can only imagine what a day of personal vindication it must be for the Adani group today, and personally for Gautam Adani, because he has faced this global vilification campaign, of course, helped in no small measure by certain actors, motivated actors here in India. So it must be a great day of vindication for them as well. But more importantly, the Hindenburg, entity, so-called research entity, is just one player in this well-orchestrated conspiracy. And now we're seeing it completely collapse. But the most important and the final point that from my analysis, Tamanna, is this: that why does somebody wind up an LLC or a limited liability company in terms of law? Why is it, wound up in such haste? And the answer to that really is very interesting. Someone does that to limit their liabilities in terms of penalties and perhaps even investigations going forward, but more so to avoid any scrutiny. And the individual partners of that LLC want to somehow escape and evade scrutiny. So that, to my mind, is the most interesting aspect here, that why would you disband it? And it is not so simple to disband it in the state of New York. You have to take certain permissions. You have taken licenses that have to be handed back over. It can't be done overnight. So I think the writing would have been on the wall once the new president was elected. And they would have understood that, sooner rather than later, it's going to become very clear what the real motives were behind Hindenburg's actions. And lastly, very importantly, my sources in India tell me that very serious action now against certain individuals who had conspired with Hindenburg abroad, who are based in India, now is very likely, any day now. Something very serious is going to come.
Likely from what end, Jay? Likely from the US perspective, or likely from Indian authorities?
Well, the Indian actors, the Indian individuals and entities who are involved will of course be subject to the jurisdiction of Indian authorities as they rightly should be. But I wouldn't be surprised, Tamanna, if the US, with the new administration coming in, and they're going to look at all of these issues as well, and they're going to try and get to the bottom of why the DOJ was acting in such a motivated manner, targeting entities and individuals for political reasons. And if they expand their investigation as well and perhaps reach certain entities based maybe in India, in Dubai, or perhaps even in the United Kingdom, very, very possible.
Okay, so maybe this was an escape for consequences of his actions, but I want to see this from the perspective of what it means for Indian markets, Indian equities. And Ajay Bagga, I want you to come in on this, because it's sometimes from the point of view of okay, was this Adani group at the receiving end of the attack? Was there something bigger? Then there's the politics of it, then opposition parties jump in. But I want to focus the question with you on markets, because when this happened in January, it raised questions not only on one group. It raised questions on the sanctity of how India runs. How do Indian corporates run? How does our economy run? These are very serious allegations which weren't limited to one group. It raised questions on the strength of the Indian equity markets and our fundamentals. How do you see the developments of today in that context?
Yeah, talking very, simply on the markets, Tamanna, on a daily basis on the New York Stock Exchange, 25% positions are short. NASDAQ, 31% positions are short. Indian markets, if you look at it, we have the put-call ratio, which gives you a good idea of how overbought or oversold the markets are. But we have a very small portion of the derivatives as such. But at an index level, we get an idea on a daily basis. So short sellers have a position in any market. They make the market deeper. They also work against overvaluation. At times, they also help to discover fraud. So that is not under attack here with Hindenburg. We should not identify Hindenburg as with the good work that short sellers do in the markets. They provide volumes and depth also. Otherwise, there would be no market if it was a one-way market of only buyers. So that's one. Second, in developed markets also, like Korea, like a lot of European markets, at the height of short selling frenzy, we have seen short selling being banned. China regularly calls up institutional investors in case they have shorts on Chinese stocks, and a lot of times they get them unwound. Indian markets allow anyone to come in, allow anybody to go out. But now that you are the fifth biggest economy, that is not at times digestible to a lot of forces inimical to India. So what we saw in the markets, in terms of the Hindenburg report, I spoke to a very senior lawyer also, and he told me that a lot of the material in the report seemed to be composed by an Indian lawyer. The language, the idioms, the phraseology is more Indian than a US firm composing this. So one doesn't know where exactly this was and how deep were the tentacles. But having said that, what came out over the last 1.5 years or 2 years now, the Indian market's robustness was shown. The case went up to Supreme Court. They went in depth at it. At depth, the Supreme Court examined all the issues at hand, and they gave a judgment. And we continue to function today as a very robust market, as the fifth biggest market in the world. But overall, I would again say short sellers like Jim Chanos, who brought down Enron, a lot of short sellers have done well. But why is the hedge fund short selling hedge fund AUM at $6 billion while the total hedge fund AUM runs into trillions? The short answer is short selling hardly ever works. It does not get consistent returns over the long term. Long short funds are there. Those are needed. They provide depth. We are not against those. Sell side brokerages doing downgrades on companies, on managements, on changing business models, those are welcome. But there is a gray line when this is used for immediate profit. The sell side researcher who writes a report is not a market player. They are not allowed to invest in those stocks.
Clearly there were shades of grey. And if you look at the SEBI notice to Hindenburg, they are saying that you displayed this report to Kingdon in advance before you made it public. You shared non-public information and you did it in lieu of a 25% share of profits. So this was not your everyday short sell. I get your point completely, Ajay, that short sellers have their place in markets, but this is a different situation. Jay, just exactly on this point, and while I've been speaking to people through the day, one point being made is, why are you assuming that because Nate Anderson has shut Hindenburg, that he's shutting his activities? Because in his letter, if you see, he does say, I'm looking forward to other things that I will do. What do you make of that?
No, absolutely, Tamanna. I mean, if you read that letter, he also talks about how his colleagues are branching out now on their own and they're going to start their own entities and so on. So this isn't exactly the letter of a person who's done and dusted with business and now wants to basically hang up his boots and do nothing. But the fact is that his motivations for shutting shop, as Mr. Bagga very rightly pointed out, in fact, this has been told to me by a few other individuals in Delhi as well, that the language of that report consistently displayed a lot of phrases and expressions which would typically not be used by American lawyers. And I've worked in the US, I've studied there, and I agree with that assessment. It seems right to me. And having said that, Tamanna, I despise conspiracy theorists. And I'm not one for conspiracy theories at all. But, when you look at all of these different pieces and you put all the different pieces together in what's going on here, you understand that there is a common link and a common thread that runs through this entire issue. And the more you sort of analyze it, it becomes clearer and clearer that there is a gentleman, Soros. In fact, the incoming administration despises him and his family and their sort of disproportionate influence in the workings of the American, in American institutions. So you have this individual who has a storied past of using US institutions to, further their own personal agenda of wreaking interference or creating interference in governments around the world. So you can't ignore all of that. And when these attacks and, when these Hindenburg reports were coming out, as Mr. Bagga also pointed out, it all begins with, an attack on one entity. But then you see how those tentacles spread. You start then attacking you attack the fundamentals of the Indian economy. You question them. Then when that doesn't work, you start questioning the market, the regulator itself. You don't succeed doing that because, the Supreme Court intervenes and basically sets up its own independent, investigation with the finest individuals possible. And that comes back with basically a clean chit. So then what do? You start attacking the reputation of the SEBI chief herself, So it's quite ridiculous. And now, for it to have ended in this manner, I think it's quite amusing. And I'm waiting to see now what the repercussions will be on the actors in India. I have been told by a very reliable source that a massive money trail has been found. And I don't want to say anything more than that, but I think time will tell.
So a massive money trail leading back. I mean, there's a larger conspiracy here. I don't know if the credibility question now comes into play, Ajay, because the first time this happened, it was taken seriously by investors, and that's why you saw this outsized reaction, right? And the great thing about markets, it's a very clear and equivocal communication of what the market is thinking. That's what the price tells you. The first time round, there was a huge reaction. Second time round, it was a whimper. Do you think now that credibility becomes a big question for Nate Anderson and Hindenburg?
No, definitely. Yeah, I would say definitely. I'll give you an example. I used to work for a foreign bank, and years back, a couple of decades back, our global CEO in Europe, he gave an interview where he spoke about a media conglomerate and said, I would not give a loan to that conglomerate. They went into a lot of trouble, that corporation. They sued the CEO of the bank, and they won hundreds of millions of euro suit against the bank, which the bank had to pay. So there is a lot of accountability in financial markets. Why are we so highly regulated, Tamanna? Why you can't buy stocks, your family can't buy stocks? Because we are talking stocks all day long. I don't talk stocks, I talk macros, because I don't want to be hauled up at this age by some regulator somewhere, or I am short and I talk long, or I'm long and I talk short. I don't want all that just for coming in media. So it's a very highly regulated, over-regulated entity. That's the financial landscape. In that, you have a free radical who can do anything they want, and they can take positions, as Jay correctly mentioned, 25% sharing positions is their business model with hedge funds, because they don't have capital of their own. First, this gentleman tried to be a whistleblower for the US SEC, did not get much, and in fact got sued by the first three clients about whom he wrote. They all took him to courts. Then he changed his business model to this, was successful with a couple of companies, Nicola and one more company, made some money, was not so successful elsewhere. And then, did he tag along with somebody else? I really I take Jay's point that let's not delve into conspiracy theories, but the pattern was very clear. The way the toolkits started immediately and the way the stocks were hammered, there was a very big short buildup on the stocks, especially in the offshore market, where it's very difficult to get to the ultimate beneficiary. You have so many layers in the middle, but somebody made good money in that very sharp fall, 8 lakh crores that the Indian market
Someone
lost.
made good money, and did they know in advance? Richard Harris joining us now. Dr. Harris, can you hear me?
I can indeed, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for speaking with us today and for your time. He's, of course, the Chief Executive of Port Shelter Investment Management. Dr. Harris, what do you make of the announcement made by Nate Anderson today? I'm sure you read the letter. And Hindenburg now shutting shop.
Yes, I have. These activist investors tend to be fairly lone wolves. They are very much the analytical types, and they can be likely to do things that maybe seem to other people to be capricious. I mean, we have one or two in Hong Kong, people who will do a lot of research into companies and come up with very different views. Now, I think one of the concerns with the short sellers is where is the line drawn between proper, sensible, accurate market research and market manipulation? And I think that's one question that obviously people have. The other thing too, of course, is that you're a target. You're not going to hang around and do nothing. You are going to complain. So I rather suspect that maybe Hindenburg has had quite a lot of people coming after him as well, saying, no, we didn't do it, and now prove it. And it's very difficult for a small company actually to do that. Hindenburg has had quite some success, actually, both in the electric vehicle arena and other areas, where the SEC has actually followed up a number of their analytical reports and actually sued the persons involved. So he has got a record of getting it right. But it's not always the case that you're going to strike it right every time. And when you do, you're likely to have a lot of objection.
Yeah, and when you don't, should you be paying the consequences?
Yes, correctly. When
you don't, should you be paying the price of it? And not only in terms of your position, because if a short seller goes wrong, they lose a lot of money, but in terms of the impact that you've had, because his report and his attacks have had far-reaching impact here in the Indian equity scenario. What's your view on that, Dr. Harris?
Well, I can't really comment on specific cases because that would not be right in case there's further action due on that. But I think in general terms, I actually do approve of these short sellers. Yes, there are market forces and also regulatory forces out there to try and prevent and reduce manipulation. People who have had accusations thrown at them and then come through with them with flying colors typically are stronger afterwards.
True.
So I think in general terms, this is a sector of the market that is valuable in terms of creating liquidity and price discovery.
Yeah, no, so that is the function of a short seller. In this case, was it insidious? Is he suddenly now shutting shop to escape the consequences of his action is another question. In terms of the timing, Dr. Harris, do you have any view on Hindenburg making this announcement 4 days before Donald Trump takes over?
Well, I've heard people say that it's linked. I don't really think it is. Don't forget there are quite a lot of activist short sellers in the U.S. I mean, probably the most famous one is Carson Block of Muddy Waters, of course, which has had a very similar sort of thing. So I think it is part of the market environment in the U.S. If you can't prove your case analytically, somebody will take you to court, and if you can't prove it in court, then obviously there are consequences. So I think that it's really part of the system, the capitalist system. And I don't really think it's got much to do with Donald Trump.
Okay, maybe not. I mean, the timing and the language of the letter raises quite a few questions. Dr. Richard Harris, thank you so much for speaking with us. Jay, just in terms of, and you spoke about what you have heard from a New Delhi, India perspective. In terms of the Trump administration's view, of Hindenburg, seeing the fact that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, has had a change at the top. You've had a Republican come out and question the case in itself. What do you make of that context?
Very respectfully, I disagree with what Dr. Harris said, and I not for a moment would discount his decades of experience in this area. But speaking strictly, from using the instinct of a criminal lawyer that one has honed, I can tell you that one of the reasons perhaps why they're winding up is because, some of this material which either they created or was fed to them, they have themselves realized is fabricated. And once that happens, you used the right, term, you said insidious. It is insidious because now once you know that this material on the basis of which you've acted as a short seller is, not true or authentic or correct, then what do? And now you have a representative, you have a US congressman waking up to this and demanding a further inquiry. They're asking Merrick Garland to preserve all the material, the memos, the documents, the reasoning, the file notings that led up to this decision. So when that full-fledged inquiry, if it were to take place, happens, then naturally, these short sellers would be hauled up, and they will be asked, as to, the anonymity that their sources enjoy will be gone. They'll have to pierce the veil once law enforcement comes in. So in that scenario, when you know something like that is impending, there has to be a sense of panic. And I would therefore not agree that, this is just a coincidence. It absolutely is not a coincidence. As I said earlier, winding up of an LLC is not something, it's not a switch you can turn off. There is a lot of planning that goes into it that takes days, weeks. You have to pay off people, you have to settle the shares of the members of the LLC. There are, licenses and permissions that have to be, turned in. There's a lot of things that have to be taken care of. And why would you do that when you're saying also in your letter that your colleagues want to continue with this business and want to set up their own independent shops? So what is it therefore? And plus, it's not like he's saying he's not going to participate in in the activities of his colleagues. In fact, he says it in his letter that he's going to promote them and so on. So when you want to remain in this business, why are you therefore then shutting your shop in such a great hurry? So I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it would be too naive to say that this is a coincidence.
I mean,
there is a storm coming. There is a storm coming. And look, they've played their cards. Whoever had to play their cards, had it been a second Biden administration, maybe this would have, turned out to be very profitable for them. But that's not going to happen now. Yeah. So, you have to, the chips have to be called in at some point, and now maybe this is it.
Yeah, and the short seller knows when to strike. Because that's what they want to do.
That's right.
The short sellers trained to know when they strike. Now, I just have a debatable question actually on which I want your view, Mr. Bagga. And I've been talking to people through the day. One question clearly is that Nate Anderson, whatever his reasons may have been, whatever it may have been, did wreak havoc for a lot of small investors in January of 2023. A lot of people suffered. And yes, some of those positions have come back, some may have exited. We don't know when each investor came in and came out. Should he face the consequences for those actions, especially if this was mala fide? If, he made money on the side. The other point of view is that anyone who's in equity markets knows the risks. So why go out of your way to protect them? Just wanted to know what you think.
No, see, if this was a big sell-side brokerage bringing out a report, there are checks and balances. You accept that. If it was every month we analyze what are the stocks mutual funds have sold, what have they bought. There are media articles on top 3 exits from mutual funds. It's not that market moving, that large market moving. What happened here was the entire ecosystem and the toolkit. So the report came. Hardly anybody reads a 170-page report, Tamanna. Very few people are there in the market who will read that much, and especially not the retail investor. What happened post that, when it became political, when it became ecosystemic, then it caused huge damage. So I am not saying one industrial house represents India or something. That's how people will attack us post this program. I'm not at all saying that. But I do say that it was an attack on our manner of functioning in India. It questioned the rule of law in India and the sturdiness of our regulatory ecosystem. I think all that came in, and retailers were really caught up in that. So definitely a large portion of retailers lost money, funds lost money, and retailers again lost money through funds who lost. LIC came in and they bought at the bottom. And as they do, they are a very sound investor. One of the best investment committees is Life Insurance Corporation of India. They made a lot of money by bottom fishing, but then you need holding power, which the retailer doesn't have. I'm not again against shorting the markets. That's good. It creates balanced markets and always it creates depth. So no ban on shorting. But somebody coming from outside, especially an unknown outfit with very few people and with no capital, with no skin in the game, coming and destroying a big industrial group in an emerging country like India, which is a threat to certain ecosystems. And then how a very broad ecosystem took it up. I think that was the bigger issue,
Okay.
and retailers definitely lost out. Yes,
Dr. Richard Harris is back, and I'm told he wants to come in. Yes, Dr. Harris.
Oh, hi. No, I just wanted to follow up by saying what we need to be careful with these short sellers is not to immediately assume that they're all manipulating the market or not. You know, that will be tested in court, and we shouldn't actually assume that that's the sort of thing it's going to be. My feeling with the timing of the Hindenburg thing is the kitchen's just got too hot for him. It's a fairly small company. He's dealing with some very, very big issues. And I think it was just about the time that he was probably decided to go out. So, yes, it coincides with Trump coming in. Yes, it may be that the Department of Justice under Trump will be much more aggressive against short sellers, especially if they perhaps target some of the Trump stocks. But I don't think that we should read too much into this relatively small company leaving the market.
Yeah, so relatively small company, outsized impact in the Indian context. And yes, maybe not all short sellers are malicious, but then what all short sellers say and claim cannot be taken at face value either. You have to look at it perhaps both ways. That's all the time we have, and we've completely run out of time. But thank you to all of you for joining us on this special edition of The Big Question.